there for 2 days before anyone bothered to review it. In the meantime, Mercer joked about it in the break room. "Woman tried to pull rank on me," he said to Officer Diaz. "Flashed her government ID like that was supposed to impress me." Diaz raised a brow. "Wait, she was military?" Mercer shrugged. "So," she says, "some fed with an attitude. What was her name?" Mercer leaned back in his chair, popped open a bag of chips, and said, "Wallace? Adrian Wallace." Diaz's face shifted. "You mean Lieutenant Colonel Wallace?" Mercer paused. "How would you know that?" "She gave a lecture at the academy last year," Diaz said slowly. "She's not just military, she's high up. Runs logistics out of Fort Wayne, Bronze Star, 2 deployments. She's legit." Mercer scoffed, waving it off. "Don't care who she is. On the road, I'm the authority." But something about Diaz's tone lingered. That small note of caution, of respect. It chipped at Mercer's usual armor. Still, he didn't go back and watch the footage. He didn't think twice about the ticket. In his head, it was already done and buried. But it wasn't, because Wallace had filed a formal complaint the next morning, not just with Internal Affairs, with the Office of the Inspector General, and she wasn't alone. The video she recorded had already been passed along to her legal team, and a copy was quietly making rounds through the military chain of command. Mercer didn't know any of this yet. He was back in his routine, tuts, responding to minor calls, barking at people during traffic stops, carrying himself like a man who couldn't be touched, because for years he hadn't been. The system had protected him. Supervisors had looked the other way. Union reps had shut down complaints. And Mercer had come to believe the rules didn't apply to him the way they did to everyone else. But now, there was someone on the other side who wasn't afraid. Someone who didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't crumble. She just documented everything, followed protocol, made one phone call at the right time to the right office, and she had receipts. But Mercer didn't see it coming until the envelope hit his desk, marked formal inquiry. Adrian Wallace wasn't the kind of person who made noise for no reason. She wasn't dramatic, she wasn't confrontational, and she sure didn't have time to chase down every small injustice that came her way, not after 22 years in uniform, 2 tours overseas, and enough close calls to make most people fold. But this time, it was different, because she wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about every young soldier she mentored, every civilian she'd seen mistreated without anyone to speak up for. Them. Every woman. Especially every black woman who'd been forced to swallow their pride just to avoid making things worse. And she wasn't doing that anymore. Back at Fort Wayne, Indiana, Adrienne sat in her office the morning after the stop, staring at her screen. She'd barely slept. Not because she was angry, though she was, but because the whole thing kept replaying in her head, the way he talked to her like she was nothing, the way his hand hovered over his holster, the way he tried to bait her into reacting. She knew the script, knew what could have happened if she hadn't kept her tone even, knew exactly how fast things could go wrong, even there for 2 days before anyone bothered to review it. In the meantime, Mercer joked about it in the break room. "Woman tried to pull rank on me," he said to Officer Diaz. "Flashed her government ID like that was supposed to impress me." Diaz raised a brow. "Wait, she was military?" Mercer shrugged. "So," she says, "some fed with an attitude. What was her name?" Mercer leaned back in his chair, popped open a bag of chips, and said, "Wallace? Adrian Wallace." Diaz's face shifted. "You mean Lieutenant Colonel Wallace?" Mercer paused. "How would you know that?" "She gave a lecture at the academy last year," Diaz said slowly. "She's not just military, she's high up. Runs logistics out of Fort Wayne, Bronze Star, 2 deployments. She's legit." Mercer scoffed, waving it off. "Don't care who she is. On the road, I'm the authority." But something about Diaz's tone lingered. That small note of caution, of respect. It chipped at Mercer's usual armor. Still, he didn't go back and watch the footage. He didn't think twice about the ticket. In his head, it was already done and buried. But it wasn't, because Wallace had filed a formal complaint the next morning, not just with Internal Affairs, with the Office of the Inspector General, and she wasn't alone. The video she recorded had already been passed along to her legal team, and a copy was quietly making rounds through the military chain of command. Mercer didn't know any of this yet. He was back in his routine, tuts, responding to minor calls, barking at people during traffic stops, carrying himself like a man who couldn't be touched, because for years he hadn't been. The system had protected him. Supervisors had looked the other way. Union reps had shut down complaints. And Mercer had come to believe the rules didn't apply to him the way they did to everyone else. But now, there was someone on the other side who wasn't afraid. Someone who didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't crumble. She just documented everything, followed protocol, made one phone call at the right time to the right office, and she had receipts. But Mercer didn't see it coming until the envelope hit his desk, marked formal inquiry. Adrienne Wallace wasn't the kind of person who made noise for no reason. She wasn't dramatic, she wasn't confrontational, and she sure didn't have time to chase down every small injustice that came her way, not after 22 years in uniform, 2 tours overseas, and enough close calls to make most people fold. But this time, it was different, because she wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about every young soldier she mentored, every civilian she'd seen mistreated without anyone to speak up for. Them. Every woman. Especially every black woman who'd been forced to swallow their pride just to avoid making things worse. And she wasn't doing that anymore. Back at Fort Wayne, Indiana, Adrienne sat in her office the morning after the stop, staring at her screen. She'd barely slept. Not because she was angry, though she was, but because the whole thing kept replaying in her head, the way he talked to her like she was nothing, the way his hand hovered over his holster, the way he tried to bait her into reacting. She knew the script, knew what could have happened if she hadn't kept her tone even, knew exactly how fast things could go wrong, even with the camera rolling. Her aide, Sergeant Daniels, poked his head in. "You good, ma'am?" Adrienne looked up, expression calm but focused. "No, but I'm handling it." He stepped in, closed the door behind him. "I saw the footage," he said. "You want me to loop in the base, attorney?" "Already done," she said. Daniels hesitated. "You sure you want to go public with it?" Adrienne leaned back. "I'm not looking for headlines. I'm looking for accountability." And she meant that. She'd spent her entire career leading with discipline, with integrity. Her rank wasn't just something she wore on her shoulder. It was something she earned through years of work, through decisions that affected lives. She'd commanded convoys across dangerous terrain, coordinated relief efforts after hurricanes. She'd been responsible for soldiers, supplies, and security across 4 different continents. But none of that had mattered when she was pulled over on a quiet road in Ohio. To Mercer, she was just another suspicious driver who didn't move fast enough when questioned. And the thing that ate at her wasn't just how he treated her, it was how comfortable he seemed doing it. That was the real problem. So, Adrienne made a few calls, first to JAG, then to the Inspector General's office. She attached the footage, filed the complaint. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth, backed by video, and let the facts stand on their own. By the end of the week, the story had started to circulate within military legal circles. It hadn't hit the media, not yet. But Mercer's name was now attached to an internal investigation. The department's legal counsel had been notified. And Adrienne? She kept working, kept showing up, didn't mention it unless asked. But behind the scenes she was preparing something else, because her lawyer had suggested that the stop wasn't just inappropriate, it might have violated federal policy, considering her government status and the absence of probable cause. And if it came to it, they'd go to court. Adrian didn't flinch at that. She welcomed it. But Mercer still didn't believe this would go anywhere. Not until he was told to appear in front of a judge. The envelope was thin, nothing flashy, just a plain manila folder with his name typed on the front and a return address from the Lucas County Civil Court. Mercer tore it open in the parking lot, half distracted, figuring it was just another traffic summons or departmental memo. But it wasn't. It was a notice to appear. A formal civil rights complaint had been filed. The plaintiff, Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Wallace. The charge, violation of constitutional rights during a traffic stop, including unlawful detainment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. Mercer stood there for a minute, staring at the paper. Then he laughed, out loud. "No way," he muttered. "No way this sticks." But when he stepped back inside the station, the mood was different. His captain, Officer Redding, called him into the office. Door shut, blinds pulled. "Dan," Redding started, "we need to talk." Mercer sat, arms crossed. "About what? The lady from the other night?" "She's trying to play victim." Redding didn't smile. "She's not playing anything. Do you even know who she is?" "I don't care who she is. She got pulled over, acted smug, and now she's mad I didn't kiss her shoes." Redding leaned forward. "She's not just some random motorist. She's a lieutenant colonel, a combat veteran. Her record's spotless, her connections are deep, and she's got the whole thing on tape, from two angles, yours and hers." Mercer scoffed. "So what, we just roll over, say, sorry because she's got some stripes?" "Number. But we don't pretend this is nothing either. You're going to court, and if this gets out, and it will, it's going to blow up." Still, Mercer couldn't shake the arrogance. "She didn't even get arrested. I didn't touch her. I was following procedure. You were on edge, Dan. You escalated. You treated her like a suspect before you even knew who she was." Mercer bit his lip. For once, he didn't have a snappy response. The notice said the court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, word had spread across the department. Whispers in the locker room, sideways, glances in the hallway. Nobody said anything to his face, but Mercer could feel the shift. He wasn't the wolf anymore. He was bleeding and the rest could smell it. Back at her base, Adrian prepared too, but in a different way. She didn't throw press conferences or demand attention. She met quietly with her legal team, reviewed every second of the footage, and outlined her experience in exact detail. She was calm, collected, but relentless. Her lawyer, Delaney Price, sat across the table from her and said, "You sure you want to do this in court? It's public. It'll follow you." Adrian nodded. "Good. Let it." Price paused. Most people would have let it go. "I've let too much go already," Adrian said. "This isn't just about me." She wasn't looking for a payout. She whispered, "I have a master's in international business, and I've been waiting 2 years for a promotion. This lady was scrubbing urinals last week." Her friend shrugged. "Maybe she knows something we don't." "Oh, please. It's Kellerman trying to look progressive. Check a box." That same energy trickled into boardrooms and Slack messages. Quiet resentment mixed with confusion. People weren't used to upward moves coming from outside the usual ladder. Denise felt it the second she stepped into her new office on the 12th floor. It was modest, just a desk, a plant, and a computer she hadn't touched yet. But to her, it looked like another planet. When HR finished onboarding her, she asked if she could keep the night uniform, not to wear, just to remind herself. That afternoon, she met with Victor, head of international operations. He walked in with a clipboard and tight eyes. Didn't shake her hand, didn't sit. "So, you're the new liaison," he said, like it was a joke wrapped in politeness. Denise looked up. "That's what I'm told. You have experience in corporate environments?" She smiled. Only from the outside looking in, he didn't laugh. I've got reports from Italy, contracts from our Dubai partners, and an entire vendor issue in Sao Paulo. Think you can manage that? She stood up. I'll need a few hours to review, but yes. Victor dropped the folder on her desk and walked out. Later that night, Kellerman stopped by her office. How's day one? She exhaled, leaned back in her chair. I've had worse. He smiled. Victor, give you a hard time? He doesn't scare me, I figured. She paused, then added, but can I ask you something? Anything? Why now? Why me? You could have just given me a bonus and kept moving. He leaned against the door frame. Because I saw myself in you. She raised an eyebrow. You were a janitor? No, but I was overlooked. A lot. I came from nothing. My dad fixed cars in a town no one visits. I worked 3 jobs through college. People thought I didn't belong in rooms like this. Denise nodded slowly. Now you're the one deciding who gets in. He nodded back. Exactly. There was a beat of silence before Denise looked down at the file on her desk. I'll be honest, I'm nervous. Good. Means you care. She looked up again. There's going to be people who hate this. They'll get over it. Or they won't. Either way, we're moving forward. Kellerman stood straight. You have a story, Denise. A real one. And now, you've got a platform. Then he turned to leave. As the door clicked behind him, Denise looked around her office. She remembered the years she'd cried in bathroom stalls during lunch breaks, the nights she came home with aching feet and barely enough energy to heat up soup, the birthdays she missed, the promotions she watched go to people who never even said good morning. She opened her desk drawer and placed the old janitor badge inside, not to forget, to remember exactly what it took to get here. But this story wasn't just hers anymore, and the spotlight was about to grow much brighter. By the end of the week, Denise's nameplate was mounted outside her office. Black letters on brushed steel. Denise Atwater, Cultural Liaison, International Affairs. It looked official, clean, permanent. Word had gotten out. Formally, this time. The company-wide email hit inboxes Friday morning, sent by Kellerman himself. It was short, clear, and carried weight. He explained her role, her background, and, more importantly, her value. He didn't frame it as charity or a feel-good gesture. He made it clear she was the best person for the job, period. But that didn't stop the noise. Some managers grumbled under their breath. Others softened up once they saw her in action. She navigated conversations with foreign clients better than the software. She corrected mistranslations in old contracts that had cost them money for years, and she never showed off. She just worked, quietly, smoothly, better than anyone had expected. On Monday, Denise was asked to join a meeting with a delegation from Morocco. The company's North African expansion had been stuck for months over miscommunication and mistrust. She walked into the room in a soft beige blazer, sat at the table, and introduced herself in fluent Moroccan Arabic. The room changed. You could feel it, the shift. People leaned in. They listened. Because when someone speaks your language, you don't just hear words, you hear respect. After the meeting, one of the Moroccan partners approached her privately. He touched his chest gently, a traditional sign of gratitude. No one's ever done that for us, he said. Not in our language. Not like that. Denise nodded. You matter. That's all. By midweek, Kellerman made another move. He renamed the company's main training room, where all new hires gathered for orientation and where mid-level leaders held workshops. The plaque outside the door was taken down. In its place, the Atwater Room. No big announcement, no party, just a quiet sign and a shift that meant more. Not regret, just a slip of honesty. Mercer didn't see a person that night. He saw someone who didn't move fast enough, didn't speak the way he liked, didn't submit, and now, sitting across from her, with her rank laid bare, the courtroom could see it too. But the trial wasn't over, because now the jury had to decide what accountability really looks like. 3 days passed before the verdict came in. The courthouse was quieter this time. No military uniforms, no off-duty officers watching from the back, just Adrian, her lawyer, and a few civilians who had followed the case out of curiosity. Mercer sat with his attorney, hands clasped, trying to hold the same blank expression he'd worn through the entire trial. But this time, his jaw moved slightly, like he was grinding his teeth without even knowing it. The judge, Cynthia Morales, shuffled the papers on her bench and looked out across the courtroom. In the matter of Wallace versus Mercer, she began, the jury has found in favor of the plaintiff. Mercer shifted. Adrian stayed still. The court recognizes a violation of constitutional rights during an unlawful stop and detainment. Furthermore, the court finds that the actions taken by Sergeant Mercer were not aligned with department policy or basic expectations of professional conduct. No one clapped, no gasps, just the flat weight of consequence. Mercer's attorney leaned in and whispered, "We'll appeal." But even he didn't sound sure. The judge continued, "While no criminal charges will be filed at this time, the plaintiff is entitled to damages totaling $35,000, and this decision will remain on permanent public record. Furthermore, this ruling will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for internal review and policy evaluation." Adrian didn't smile. She didn't pump her fist or celebrate. She just nodded once. Not to the judge, not to the jury, but to herself. She had done what she came to do. After the hearing, Mercer stood outside the courthouse, pacing near the bottom steps. Reporters had started to show up, not in big waves, just a few local outlets, but enough for him to look down and cover his face with a folder as the cameras clicked. He didn't speak, didn't make a statement. He just walked to his car and drove off. Inside, Adrienne stopped in the hallway, pulled out her phone and read the notification. "Verdict in your favor, case closed." Her attorney caught up to her. "You could have asked for more." Adrienne shook her head. It was never about the money. Delaney looked at her for a second. "You think it'll change anything?" Adrienne turned toward the glass doors and said, "I don't know. But maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice." A week later, Mercer was put on administrative leave while an internal review was conducted. Rumors said he might be reassigned. Others said this was the beginning of the end for his career. Either way, the shield that had once protected him was cracked, and everyone could see it. At Fort Wayne, Adrienne returned to her duties like nothing had happened. She wasn't interested in being a hero. She didn't want interviews. She had work to do, people to train, missions to manage, responsibilities to uphold. But within her command, the message was clear. You don't always have to raise your voice to demand respect. You don't always have to break to prove you've been wronged. And sometimes, the quietest stance speaks, the loudest. But even with the verdict behind her, Adrienne knew the fight wasn't over. Because accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about what comes next. 2 months later, Adrienne stood in front of a room filled with young recruits at Fort Wayne. Most of them had only been in uniform a few weeks. Fresh faces, open minds, hungry to serve. She wasn't there to talk about combat strategy or logistics this time. She was there to talk about leadership and what it means when no one's watching. She looked around the room and asked a simple question. How many of you think a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up, some half-hearted, some confident. She nodded. I understand why you'd think that, but here's the truth. Respect isn't something you're owed. It's something you prove, every day. every choice. She let the silence hang for a second. Same goes for power, she continued. The badge, the rank, the authority. It's not a shield, it's a weight. And if you can't carry it with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all. In the back, one of the newer soldiers leaned forward, eyes locked. Adrian paused, then added, "When I was stopped by an officer who forgot that truth, I could have yelled, I could have panicked, I could have let it slide." She looked around. I didn't do any of those things. I documented it. I filed. I showed up in court, and I told the truth. A long pause. That officer thought his badge made him untouchable until he saw my rank, not just on my uniform, but in how I carried myself. That's the difference. That's leadership. The room stayed quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from disinterest. It was the kind that comes when something lands. Adrian closed the folder in front of her and looked up. Lead with character. Serve with integrity. And never forget, you don't just represent the uniform, you represent every person who came before you and everyone who will come after. She stepped off the platform, not for applause, not for thanks, but because the work was already done. Let this story be a reminder. Authority without accountability is just a mask for weakness. Speak up, stand firm, and when you see wrong, don't turn away. Because silence is comfort for the guilty, but courage is protection for the rest of us.